Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my podcast. My name is Mackenzie Portney, as I'm sure you all know by now, and this is Politics with Portney, focusing on white privilege in America. Last week on my podcast, I had two interviewees, my friend Bobby and my brother Josh. Bobby did not agree that white privilege was an issue in America. He thought that each race has their own privileges and that white specifically doesn't have an advantage over people of color. Meanwhile, my brother Josh thinks it is similar to I do, a severe issue in America, and he gave some examples. So today we are going to further unpack that. I'm going to be talking myself. We're going to talk more about white privilege and the Black Lives Matter movement. So, Black Lives Matter was co-founded by Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi. By the way, this information I'm getting from is the Black Lives Matter website and Wikipedia. I know Wikipedia doesn't seem like a super reliable source, but it's checked up on every 10 minutes or so I'm pretty sure everything here is accurate. So Black Lives Matter is an international activist movement, and they do campaigns against violence, systemic racism towards black people, speaking out about police killings of black people, racial profiling, police brutality, and racial inequality in the criminal justice system. And I've talked about all of these things here because they definitely are severe issues in America and throughout the world. So in 2013, the hashtag Black Lives Matter movement really took place after the shooting of Trayvon Martin. If you're not familiar with that, Trayvon Martin was suspended from school and he was visiting one of his parents, and he was carrying a pack of candy, a bottle of soda, and a black hoodie, and was shot by a security guard who was not authorized to use his gun. So, since then, the movement has really taken force. But it's important to remember that this movement, although the name is new, protesting racial inequality and all of these things that Black Lives Matter stands for, has been in the U.S. for decades upon decades. Like the Black Power movement, the anti-apartheid movement, so lots of things like that in the USA and the world. So the Black Lives Matter movement tries to be very inclusive, all shades, all sexualities. I think that there are some members who aren't as inclusive, so that's really a shame. I feel like personally we should all just really focus on what matters. Sexuality isn't the problem here. It definitely is a problem in America, but we should be focusing on the fact that people of color do not have the same privileges that white people do. So they have demonstrated against deaths of people like Tony Robinson, Anthony Hill, and Sandra Bland. They were all killed either by police officers or in prison. So this is really heartbreaking that so many people have died from police brutality, and there are some questions about it though, because sometimes the police really do have to use force on people of color and white people and any type of person when their own life is at risk. The problem with police brutality, however, is that police officers have the right to use force, deadly force, upon anyone they think or believe poses a threat. So even if they're wrong, in the end, they still have the right to shoot someone and kill someone, because they have this right to use it if they believe that. So I personally think that police officers definitely need a stricter code and use force as a truly last resort. If a black person, for example, won't hand over his gun or is being violent towards the police, yes, it may be necessary, but that shouldn't depend on the color of the skin or the fact that they are wearing a black hoodie, as I've said. So, not everyone has responded kindly to the Black Lives Matter movement. People have been nasty. There have been violence against the protests and racial slurs thrown at the protesters. And protesters aren't just people of color. They have also included white people. So this is a really terrible problem that people are protesting such a powerful and important movement, because the Black Lives Matter movement has gotten things done. In various court cases, when justice has not been served, there isn't a trial for a police officer who shot a black person with unjustly. I mean, cases haven't always been thrown away, or they have been revisited after these powerful demonstrations. And these demonstrations can vary from protests to sit-ins. Some Black Lives Matter events aren't the best because they're not run by the original founders of Black Lives Matter. Sometimes there are issues where people aren't following the rules, which is why I think that there is a lot against it. For example, there was once a person who, and then CNN found this in 2018, that the largest Facebook account claiming to be a part of the Black Lives Matter movement was just a complete scam by a white Australian man, and the fundraised money did not go to the Black Lives Matter organization. So I guess lots of people think it's a scam, or think that the movement in general is stupid. And lots of people against the movement make the argument that, well, yeah, Black Lives Matter, but so do white lives, so do gay lives, and yes, this is true, but these aren't the lives that, I mean, maybe gay lives, but in general, with this issue, these aren't the lives that are being threatened, that are in danger just because they leave the house, or just because they're in vicinity of a police officer. So people have come up with All Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter, and yes, it is true that all lives matter and that police officers' lives matter, but these other movements are diluting the cause of Black Lives Matter, because it's the Black lives specifically that we need to focus on, because those are the ones who are facing problems. I have a large deal of respect for the police, but it's come to the point where there have been so many events of injustice with the police, and justice hasn't been served, that I just in general do not trust my police. I can't imagine being a person of color in this day and age, and I would be terrified if I were near a police officer. Also, the police flag has recently become a huge thing, which has only really come up, at least from what I have seen, since the Black Lives Matter movement started. And it's great to, be proud to be a police officer, but the problem with this is that it is like an interpretation of the American flag, and you're not supposed to mess with the design of the American flag. So it really is hypocritical. With like protests against the actual Black Lives Matter protests themselves, there have led to arrests, and there also have been, like, in addition to the demonstrations, visuals for the anniversaries of certain deaths and threats against Black lives. And what I've also noticed here, since 2013, and especially since President Trump took office, is that the white supremacy movement has skyrocketed, and it has always been an issue, but I really feel that this movement took rise after people started standing up for Black people and were more vocal about it than they were in the past. Take Charlottesville. These were a bunch of people saying, we're taking back the white power, literal neo-Nazis worshipping Hitler and carrying around swastikas proudly, and people died. White people died. And Black people at the demonstration were asking the police for help, and they didn't do anything, and people were being hurt. So events like these really make you lose faith in the police officers and in America. We're never going to get past racism if police officers continue allowing this to happen, and these events are given a platform, that they're not shut down immediately. And I'm not against all police officers, most of them are great, but this is a serious issue, especially in places like Charlottesville. When you're participating in Black Lives Matter's protests, I really suggest that you do research, because I do support the organization, but you really need to do research on the shooting or whatever exactly they are protesting to make sure, do you believe that this is warranted? Was the shooting actually warranted? Is protesting warranted? Because sometimes people are monsters and need to be shot for the protection of others. So really do your research on cases. Yeah, so, like, for example, in Pittsburgh, about a year ago, a child was in a car, a black child, teenager, and it was suspected that that car was involved in a robbery. So when the police pulled them over, he ran away. He was shot and killed. You don't shoot someone to stop them, you chase them. So in that case, yes, I would support a Black Lives Matter protest for that. But if you don't have enough information, or if you just don't think that the protest is warranted, it doesn't mean you are not in support of Black lives. You just really need to do your research and be an informed individual, and that goes for all aspects of politics. Another thing that I wanted to bring up was Colin Kaepernick. I really admire him as a civil rights activist. I'm not a football fan, but he did something really great. He was the one who started kneeling during the national anthem at the football games, and he said that he, and this is a quote, won't show pride in a flag that oppressed black people and people of color. And that's a really powerful statement, and I do, to a degree, agree that the American flag does oppress people of color, and that's not okay. So I really appreciate that Kaepernick stood up to this and really started a movement, because yes, it is important to be patriotic and proud of your country, but what's even more important is the individuals within the country and making sure that the country is well representative of each people, because America is a melting pot. It's not just supposed to be white people, but white people are the ones getting privileges. So that's why I support Kaepernick's movement. The last thing I wanted to touch on was that Black Lives Matter has really come into elections. Certain presidential candidates are endorsing the movement and participating in the movement. And I think it's great, but also just make sure that they are really active and passionate about it, because some people, unfortunately, do things that they think people will like as a political gambit, and they're not actually passionate about it. For example, President Trump once said, "I've done more for the gays than anyone else in this country." And it is very clear that President Trump is homophobic. So just do your research. I like to think that most people are being honest and really want to support the movement. So you can never do too much research. So let's just recap. So the Black Lives Matter movement started in 2013, but was really an extension of all of the movements that have happened in America and around the world about against white supremacy and ending racism as a whole, speaking out against police violence, violence in general, racial profiling, and racial inequality in the criminal justice system. And that I was saying how shootings of people of color have often been dismissed in court when there was clearly, it wasn't a clear-cut situation. It wasn't obvious that the person of color was warranted to be shot and killed. So yeah, it started in 2013 after Trayvon Martin, and that's a really high-profile case. Whenever I'm in my social injustice discussion club, it always comes back to Trayvon Martin, because that's the movement that's the event that really started it. Back to the criminal injustice system, another example that I have is the Rodney King situation. If you don't know, he was brutally beaten after drunk driving, and police officers only got some 18 months in jail, and to me that's really unjust with the amount of violence that went on with that. So in the end, I really encourage you to participate in the Black Lives Matter movement. You just always need to be informed and do your research. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. You should all be supporting people of color. So yeah, this is the end of my podcast. I really hope that you learned something from these 3 episodes. It's important to me that while Black people do have some improvements since they were enslaved in America, there's still a very, very long way to go. And white people need to be responsible for standing up. The Black people cannot do it alone. So thank you so much. I really had fun doing this, even though it was just a school assignment. So thank you for making it a great experience. Bye-bye.